The vast, sunlit atrium of Larsen International Airport buzzed with an unusual energy. A polished voice drifted from the overhead speakers, announcing the final call for participants in the company's annual matchmaking event. Grace Jenkins, her mechanic's coveralls traded for a simple blue dress she bought on clearance, smoothed a stray strand of blonde hair from her face, her stomach twisting with a knot of hope and dread. Beside her, 5-year-old Andy bounced on the balls of his feet, his bright eyes scanning the sea of suits and uniforms. "Mommy, which one is my new daddy?" he chirped, pointing a small, slightly grimy finger at the pilot striding past. "Is it him? He's handsome." Grace managed a weak smile, her gaze fixed on the designated meeting point. "Maybe, sweetie. Let's find him first." Her friend Laura had sworn this one was different. Forrest Thompson, a senior pilot. "He's a catch, Grace. You deserve a break." But the closer she got, the more her hope withered. The man waiting for her looked nothing like the dashing, square-jawed photo Laura had sent. This man was short, with a pompous sneer and eyes that raked over her with undisguised disappointment. "Grace Jenkins?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. He didn't wait for a reply. "Laura sent me your file." "A mechanic, and," he added, his eyes flicking to Andy, who was now hiding behind Grace's leg, an unwed mother. "Quite the package." Grace's spine stiffened. The humiliation was a hot flush creeping up her neck. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. The photo you used, an old one," Forrest scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Listen, you're not what I was expecting. But I'm a generous man. Ditch the kid, and maybe we can still have some fun. A grease monkey with your looks might be an interesting diversion." The word struck her like a physical blow. Shock gave way to a cold, protective fury. She grabbed Annie's hand, turning to leave without a word. "We're leaving." "Not so fast," Forrest snapped, his hand clamping around her wrist like a manacle. "I didn't dismiss you yet." Grace tried to yank her arm away, her heart pounding. "Let go of me. Let her go." The voice was low, calm, but carried an authority that cut through the surrounding chatter. A man in a crisp, dark security guard's uniform had materialized beside them. He was tall, with a quiet, imposing presence that made Forrest look even smaller and more pathetic. His features were sharp and defined, his gaze steady and unyielding. As Forrest released her wrist, a harried-looking man in the tailored suit rushed to the security guard's side, whispering urgently, "Mr. Larsen, please. Your mother is waiting. You can't miss this." The guard Larsen gave the assistant a curt, silencing look before his attention settled back on Grace. Forrest, puffing up his chest, sneered, "Mind your own business, rent-a-cop. This is a private conversation." The guard didn't even glance at him. His focus was entirely on Grace and her trembling son. Andy, peeking out from behind his mother's dress, suddenly broke free. He ran straight to the tall guard and wrapped his little arms around his leg, looking up with wide, pleading eyes. "Are you my new daddy?" Andy asked, his voice clear and hopeful. "You're much handsomer than him, please. Can you be my daddy?" Grace's face burned with mortification. "Andy, no. I'm so sorry," she stammered, trying to pull her son away. But the guard simply placed a gentle hand on Andy's head, his stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. The warmth in his eyes was unexpected, and it disarmed her completely. Forrest, seeing he'd lost his audience, muttered a curse and stalked off into the crowd. The scent of old leather and metal polish clung to the air in their small apartment, a familiar comfort to Grace. While tidying Craig's discarded work jacket, her fingers brushed against the hard edge of his wallet, half open on the entry table. An instinct she couldn't name made her pause. She pushed aside a flap, revealing not just his ID, but something else tucked behind a worn photo of Andy. She pulled it out. A pilot's license, the crisp, laminated card felt alien in her hands. Craig Larson, commercial pilot, the rating was for multi-engine jets, an advanced qualification that screamed years of training and a salary far exceeding that of a security guard. A cold knot of confusion tightened in her stomach. Who was this man she had married? A discovery didn't feel like a betrayal. Not yet. But it was a jarring dissonance, a crack in the simple, honest foundation she thought they were building. The sight of the license sent a jolt through her, pulling her back 5 years to a sterile, top-floor office with a panoramic view of the runway she once commanded. She saw herself, younger and heartbroken, standing before Chairwoman Sterling of AeroCorp. "It's not a demotion, Grace," the older woman had said, her voice laced with genuine sympathy. "Moving you to the maintenance division is the only way to keep you. But to go from our star pilot to a mechanic, are you sure?" Grace had pressed her hand to her still-flat stomach, the secret she was protecting more precious than any altitude record. "Flying requires a pilot's full attention. My priorities, they're changing," she'd explained, tears blurring the fleet of jets on the tarmac below. "Handy needs me on the ground. It's not a demotion, it's a choice, my choice." She had walked away from the cockpit that day, trading the boundless sky for the greasy, rounding reality of the hangar floor. A tug on her sleeve pulled her back to the present. Andy stood beside her, his small face beaming with innocent pride. "Daddy," he announced to Craig, who was setting the table for dinner. "Did you know Mummy was a pilot? A real one. She won 3 championships." Grace's breath hitched. She quickly tucked the license back into Craig's wallet, her cheeks burning. Craig stopped, a plate in his hand, and looked from Andy to Grace. His expression wasn't surprised, but thoughtful, as if he were fitting another piece of a puzzle into place. "Is that right, Grace?" he asked, his voice gentle. She forced a tight smile. "A long time ago, Andy. Mummy's a mechanic now." Later that evening, after Andy was asleep, Craig brought it up again. He'd found an AeroCorp pilot recruitment notice online. "They're hiring," he said, turning his phone toward her. "Their standards are high. But you were a champion." The suggestion was a punch to the gut. Self-doubt, a bitter old friend, wrapped its tendrils around her heart. "Craig, that was 5 years ago. I haven't been in a simulator, let alone a cockpit. I've forgotten everything. My reflexes are gone. I'd be a laughingstock. You rebuild multi-million-dollar engines with your eyes closed," he countered, his belief in her unwavering. "You haven't lost the sky, Grace. You just put it on hold." Her resolve wavered, but it was Andy who shattered it the next morning. Overhearing their quiet conversation, he ran to her, his eyes wide and pleading. "Please, Mommy, I want to see you fly. You're the best, you can do it." His absolute faith was a light in her 5 years of darkness. Looking from her son's earnest face to Craig's steady, encouraging gaze, Grace felt a long-dormant spark of ambition flicker to life. The roar of a jet engine echoed in her memory, a siren song she could no longer ignore. "Okay," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Okay, I'll try." The following week was a blur of updating her resume and digging out old certifications. When the email from AeroCorp arrived, her hands trembled so badly she could barely open it. "Congratulations," it began. "Your application has been accepted for the preliminary simulator assessment." A breathless laugh escaped her. She had a chance. Craig swept her into a hug, lifting her off her feet. "I knew it. This calls for a celebration. I'm taking my family out to dinner, somewhere nice." When he pulled up to the curb later, it wasn't in his usual beat-up sedan. It was a sleek, black Audi, understated but undeniably expensive. "It's a loaner from work," he said quickly, before she could question it. Grace narrowed her eyes. It seemed almost too normal for him, to perfectly respectable. We could just take a taxi, she suggested, already mentally calculating the cost of a fancy dinner and what it would do to their fragile budget. A security guard's salary didn't stretch to cover orgies and fine dining. Nonsense, Craig said, opening the door for her. Andy, oblivious, cheered from the back seat, thrilled by the luxurious interior. Throughout the meal at a glittering downtown restaurant, Grace felt a knot of financial anxiety tighten in her chest. She savored the joy on Andy's face and the pride in Craig's, that she was also discreetly checking the prices on the menu, planning to slip her own credit card to the waiter when Craig wasn't looking. She would cover it. She had to. As the waiter approached with the check, she began to reach for her purse. But before she could, a sickeningly familiar voice cut through the air. Well, Grace Jenkins, I didn't realize they let the grease monkeys in here. Grace froze. Laura, her former rival from the flight academy, stood there, draped in designer clothes and clinging to the arm of Manny, a smarmy airline executive. Laura's eyes scanned their table with disdain, landing on Craig's simple attire. Don't tell me you're slumming it with a security guard now, she sneered, her voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. How can you possibly afford a place like this? Or is he spending his entire month's salary to impress you? Laura leaned in, a smile turning venomous. You should be more careful about where you show your face. I happen to be very close with the kindergarten director. It would be a shame if certain financial instabilities became an issue at the parent-teacher meeting next week. The kindergarten meeting hall, with its cheerful crayon drawings taped to the walls, felt suffocatingly small. Grace, Craig, and Andy arrived as a united front, their complementary outfits crisp navy blazers and matching cream trousers a quiet statement of family harmony. Pinned proudly to Andy's lapel was the vintage brooch Craig had given him, its diamonds catching the harsh fluorescent light, winking like tiny, distant stars. Across the room, Laura watched them, her lipstick a slash of crimson in a predatory smile. Her husband, Howard's associate, stood beside her, his expression a bland mirror of her disdain. Laura didn't wait long to make her move, gliding toward them with her son, Manny, in tow. Oh, Grace, she began, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. She gestured to a garish, oversized pin on Manny's shirt. We just had this custom made, from a private jeweler in Geneva. One must start teaching them the value of true quality early, don't you think? Grace felt the familiar sting of Laura's condescension, but refused to let it show. Dignity, not drama, she reminded herself, for Andy's sake. It's lovely, Laura. Her composure only seemed to fuel Laura's irritation. But before Laura could launch another volley, the teacher, Miss Campbell, approached, her eyes wide with a look of pure astonishment. She wasn't looking at Manny's ostentatious pin, but at the delicate, star-shaped brooch on Andy's blazer. My goodness, Miss Campbell breathed, her hand flying to her chest. Is that it can't be? The star badge of the Larson family. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. The Larson family titans of the aviation industry, local legends shrouded in wealth and mystique. The whispers turned into a low roar of speculation. A priceless artifact. Here, pinned to the jacket of a mechanic's son. The implication was a match to a tinderbox. Laura's face contorted with a mixture of envy and disbelief. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She probably bought a cheap replica. A thief and a liar, trying to pawn off fakes, fueled by a sudden, vicious impulse. She lunged forward and snatched the brooch from Andy's lapel. See? It's just glass. A sickening crack echoed in a stunned silence. The brooch, wrenched from its setting, fell from her grasp. It hit the linoleum floor and shattered, diamonds scattering like fallen stars under the cheap plastic chairs. No, Andy cried out, a sound of pure horror. In a surge of protective fury, he shoved Laura's leg. You broke it. You broke my daddy's present. Laura stumbled back, outraged. You little brat, she shrieked, and shoved him back. Andy fell hard, his small body hitting the floor with a thud. Grace was there in an instant, scooping her son into her arms. Andy, are you okay? She whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. The other parents, who moments before were merely curious spectators, now closed in, their faces masks of judgment. The pack had found its target. Did you see that? Her son assaulted Laura, one mother declared. Completely out of control. Another added, shaking her head. What kind of parenting is that? Laura, seizing the advantage, pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Grace. She's a shameless, sneaky mother, setting a terrible example, teaching her son to lie and steal and attack people. He shouldn't be class monitor. He should be expelled. The chorus of condemnation grew louder, a cacophony of insults that beat against Grace like a physical force. She clutched Andy tighter, on the verge of tears. Her apology, a choked whisper meant for no one and everyone. I'm so sorry. We didn't mean for any of this to happen. Andy, his face buried in his mother's shoulder, twisted to face the hostile crowd. Despite his fear, his voice rang out with childish conviction. It's real. Daddy gave it to me. It's real. Manny's mother stepped forward, her face dark with anger. You lied just like your mother. You little brat. I ought to. Grace spun around, shielding Andy with her body, ready to take the blow herself. She met the woman's furious gaze, her own eyes blazing with a mother's fierce, desperate love. Just then, the principal Howard, Laura's husband's uncle, strode into the center of the circle, his expression one of cold authority. He looked from his niece-in-law to Grace, his decision already made. This is a deeply concerning incident, he announced, his voice silencing the room. Given the physical aggression and the clear evidence of misrepresentation, we will have to launch a thorough investigation. Frankie, Mrs. Jenkins, this reflects a poor character that we cannot tolerate at this school. Expulsion is a very real possibility. The word hit Grace like a punch to the gut. Expulsion. The broken brooch. She imagined the cost, a sum that could swallow her life whole. A debt that would undoubtedly shatter the fragile, convenient marriage she had just begun to believe in. She looked around at the faces she once considered neighbors, now twisted into masks of contempt and suspicion. This was more than just a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal. Laura, sensing her complete victory, delivered the final, cruel blow. She turned her venomous gaze on Craig, who had remained silent and still, his face an unreadable mask. And you? She sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. Her husband, a security guard. Do you have any idea what that brooch is worth? You couldn't afford a single diamond on it if you worked for 1,000 years. Unless is that the story you're selling? That a common security guard is secretly the heir to the Larson fortune. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. The other parents joined in, their laughter a wave of ridicule. Laura's eyes glinted as she looked directly at Craig, unaware of the abyss she was about to open at her own feet. Go on, Craig, she dared, her voice echoing in the tense hall. Tell them who you are. I dare you. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Your son is a thief, and you are a liar. Laura's voice, sharp as broken glass, echoed in the suddenly silent meeting hall. Grace stood frozen, clutching Leo's small hand, the weight of every scornful gaze pressing down on her. Principal Howard cleared his throat, his expression a mask of practiced disapproval, ready to deliver the final verdict that would shatter their fragile world. This was it, of the line. Just then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung open with a decisive thud. Every head turned. Framed in the doorway stood Craig, his familiar, worn-out jacket replaced by a tailored black coat that seemed to absorb the light around it. He wasn't breathing heavily as if he'd run, but moved with an unnerving calm, his eyes scanning the scene before locking onto Grace. The raw vulnerability in her posture made something tighten in his chest. Behind him, two men in discreet, dark suits materialized, their presence a silent, formidable statement. They weren't security guards. They were professionals. "What's a security guard doing here?" Laura's husband sneered, attempting to reclaim the room's attention. "Come to drag out the trash." Craig's gaze shifted to him, cold and flat. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor, a sound that seemed to silence every whisper. He stopped beside Grace, his hand gently resting on Leo's shoulder, a silent anchor in the storm. "There's no need for Mrs. Jenkins to lie about my identity," Craig said, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner of the hall. He looked directly at Principal Howard, whose dismissive expression began to falter. It would be rather difficult for her to do so. He paused, letting the anticipation build until it was a palpable thing. "Because I am Craig Larson." A collective, sharp intake of breath. Larson. The name rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Not a common name. The Larson. The family whose aviation empire, Edicred, was practically a synonym for wealth and power in the city. The family whose name was whispered with a mixture of envy and fear. Laura's smug grin dissolved, her face draining of color until it was a ghastly white. Her husband's jaw went slack, his eyes wide with dawning horror. They had just publicly tried to crucify the fiancé of a Larson. Principal Howard's transformation was instantaneous and grotesque. His back straightened, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He smoothed his tie, a sycophantic, trembling smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Larson, good heavens, there has been a profound misunderstanding. A terrible mix-up." Craig ignored him, turning his attention to the teacher. "Miss Campbell, you're an art historian, are you not? You examined the brooch." Miss Campbell, no longer intimidated, stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "I did. It's the Celestial Star, a one-of-a-kind piece commissioned by the Larson family patriarch in the 1950s. It features a flawless, 40-carat sapphire. It is, for all intents and purposes, priceless. I recognized it from auction catalogs. The idea of it being a cheap imitation is, frankly, laughable." Her testimony was a death sentence to the accuser's credibility, exposing their malice for all to see. Craig's expression remained impassive, but his eyes were like chips of ice. He looked at the shattered pieces of Leo's star badge on the floor. "That," he said, his voice dangerously low, "was also an original, designed by my son. Handcrafted from platinum and inlaid with meteorite fragments by a master jeweler. A gift." He looked at Laura, whose entire body had begun to shake. "You slandered my fiancé, you traumatized my son, and you destroyed his property. I'm a reasonable man. Let's set aside the emotional damages for a moment and focus on the material cost." He did a quick, dismissive calculation in his head. "We'll start the bidding at 300 million. A strangled gasp came from Laura's husband. 300 million. "That's insane, is it?" Craig countered smoothly. "Then we can let the Larson family's legal team determine a more accurate figure. I assure you, it will be higher." The couple crumbled. The weight of that name, that fortune, was a physical force crushing them into submission. "No, please," Laura whimpered, the arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only pathetic desperation. "We count your husband holds a senior position at Edicred Aviation. Does he not?" Craig asked, the question rhetorical. "I've seen the audits, the kickbacks from supply contracts. You have the money, ill-gotten, but you have it." He pulled out his phone. Transfer a down payment of 50 million now. As a show of good faith, forced into a corner, with dozens of phones now silently recording, Laura's husband fumbled for his own device. His hands shook so badly he could barely type. The public, humiliating transaction laid their corruption bare for the entire parent body to witness. The quiet beeps of the confirmation tone were like nails being hammered into their social coffin. Principal Howard, seeing his chance to fully align with power, seized the moment. He puffed out his chest, his face a mask of righteous indignation. This kindergarten has a zero-tolerance policy for bullying and slander, he boomed, pointing a trembling finger at Laura and her husband. Given the appalling moral character you have displayed, which has irreparably damaged our school's reputation, your son, Manny, is hereby expelled. Effective immediately, Manny burst into tears. His parents stared, mouths agape, their despair absolute. Through it all, Grace watched as if from a great distance. The room had faded to a dull hum, the faces of the other parents blurring into a meaningless tableau. The only thing in focus was Craig, not the gentle, unassuming security guard she had married, but this stranger, this powerful, commanding man who could ruin lives with a single sentence, a security guard. The lie was so immense, so profound, it stole the air from her lungs. He had watched her count every penny for rent. He had seen her patch Leo's clothes, worrying about their next meal, while he was heir to an empire. A chasm had opened at her feet. She felt a wave of dizziness, a bitter cocktail of relief, fury, and a hollow, aching betrayal. As the disgraced family was escorted out and the other parents began to disperse in hushed, excited whispers, the hall emptied, leaving only the three of them. Craig finally turned to her, the cold authority melting from his face, replaced by a deep, pleading concern. Grace, he started, reaching for her hand. She flinched back as if burned. Don't. Her voice was a ragged whisper. Was any of it real? The question was a physical pain in her chest, or was I just an amusing diversion? A game to see how the other half lives. The word hovered on her lips, tasting like poison. Maybe we should just get a divorce. His face fell, the brief victory tasting like ash in his mouth. No. Grace, everything with you and Leo is real. It's the only thing that is. He gestured vaguely. This is just noise. I hid it to protect you both, to see if what we had could exist without all of this. He saw the priceless brooch, now safely in Miss Campbell's care. The brooch it was borrowed from Mr. Larson. He offered a weak, self-deprecating smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's me. I can verify it. His attempt at levity was clumsy, highlighting the vast gap between their realities. Grace looked at his expensive coat, at the confident set of his shoulders, and then down at her own worn hands that fixed engines and scraped by. Doubt and hurt warred within her, but beneath it all was the memory of his kindness, his unwavering support when he had nothing or when she thought he had nothing. She took a deep, shaky breath, the decision of fragile, terrifying leap of faith. Okay, she said, her voice barely audible but firm. She met his gaze, her eyes searching his for a truth she desperately needed to find. Okay, but promise me, from now on no more lies. The sleek black car pulled up to the private entrance of Genton Hospital with a quiet hum that belied the storm raging in Grace's chest. The moment the vehicle stopped, a team of medical professionals, led by a silver-haired man in a pristine suit, rushed out to meet them. They didn't look at Andy, still cradled in Craig's arms, or at Grace, a face pale with worrying. Their eyes were fixed on Craig, their heads bowed in a display of profound deference. Mr. Larson, we have the pediatric trauma unit on standby, the suited man, the hospital director, said in a hushed, urgent tone. Grace's world tilted. Mr. Larson. The name echoed the one hurled by the furious headmistress just an hour ago. It was real. The security guard uniform, the beat-up car, the quiet life, it had all been a performance. Ignoring the entourage, Craig's focus was entirely on Andy. His head took a minor blow. I just want to be sure. His voice was calm, the same steady tone he'd used when he fixed her carburetor, but now it carried an undeniable weight of command. The staff parted like the Red Sea as he strode inside. Grace followed, feeling like a ghost in a play where she'd suddenly forgotten her lines. The chaos of the schoolyard, the whispers turning to shouts, the shock on the other parents' faces as Craig's identity was revealed felt a million miles away. All that mattered was the small, quiet boy in his father's arms. They were ushered into a private suite that looked more like a luxury hotel room than a hospital ward. A young doctor with kind eyes and an easy smile entered, clapping a hand on Craig's shoulder. "Brother Craig, you look like you've been through a war." "What happened, Mark?" "This is my son, Andy," Craig said, his voice softening as he gestured to the boy being gently examined by a nurse. "He took a tumble. And this is my wife, Grace." Mark's eyebrows shot up. He extended a hand to Grace, his gaze warm but curious. "Wife? Well, it's about time this guy settled down. He never brings his girlfriends to meet me." Before Grace could process the comment, Craig corrected him, his arms sliding around her waist, a firm, possessive, and deeply reassuring gesture. "Not girlfriend, Mark. Wife. We were married 3 days ago." He said it so simply, so proudly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if announcing his marriage to a mechanic in a private hospital wing surrounded by his immense wealth was a completely normal Tuesday. In that moment, watching him stand there, so at ease in this world that was a universe away from hers, something settled in Grace's heart. The swirling anxieties, the feeling of being duped, the fear that their marriage was a farce, it all began to dissipate. This wasn't a different man. He was the same Craig, the one who listened to Andy's rambling stories about airplanes, the one who held her hand after a long day in the garage. The setting had changed, but the man hadn't. Relief washed over her as the nurse finished her assessment. "Just a superficial scrape and a small bruise, Mr. Larson. He's a lucky boy. We'll keep him for observation for an hour, just to be safe." Grace exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Andy's feeling weak. While Andy was being settled with a juice box and a tablet, she remembered the check folded in her pocket. It felt foolish now, a relic from a life that had ended an hour ago. Still, she had to. She pulled it out and held it toward Craig. The ink was stark against the paper. $100 million. "For the brooch," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a cashier's check. It's real." It was her attempt to stand on her own 2 feet, to prove she wasn't after his money, to settle the last debt between them. Craig looked at the check, then at her. A gentle smile touched his lips. He didn't take it. Instead, he reached out and folded her fingers back over it, his hand warmer and large over hers. "Grace," he said, his voice low and intimate, pulling her a little closer. "Our money is in a joint account. I had it set up yesterday. That check is meaningless. You and Andy, you are my family. There are no debts between us." Her breath caught. He wasn't dismissing her gesture. He was erasing the very concept of a transaction between them. He was telling her they were a unit, a team. Tears pricked her eyes as she tore the check into small pieces and let them fall into a nearby wastebasket. Mark, the doctor, watched the exchange with a knowing grin. "So, when you told my assistant you were taking a month's leave for a personal matter, was this it?" He teased Craig. "That, and a honeymoon," Craig answered without missing a beat, his gaze still locked on Grace. "I'm taking the time. Grace, Andy, and I are going to need it. Grace's heart swelled. He was putting them first. Not his company. Not the global enterprise he secretly ran. But his new, flash marriage family. He was choosing them, publicly and unequivocally. This was his promise. More binding than any piece of paper from a courthouse. It was the promise of a real future. Built not on convenience, but on a foundation she was just beginning to understand was love. A week later, the world had settled into a new, shimmering reality. The name Craig Larson opened every door. But at home, in the sprawling, yet surprisingly cozy mansion he'd revealed was theirs, he was just Craig. He made pancakes for Andy, listened to Grace's frustrations about a complex engine diagnostic, and held her at night as if she were the most precious thing in his world. One morning, a crisp, official-looking envelope arrived for her. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. It was from Larson Aviation. Official reinstatement and flight assignment, her dream. The one she had packed away in a box of memories and sacrifices. It was right here, in her hands. She scanned the document, her eyes flying over the technical details, the flight schedules, the aircraft specifications. She was assigned to the new flagship long-haul fleet. First Officer Grace Jenkins. It was real. She was going back to the sky. She found Craig in his home office, a vast room with a window overlooking the city. He was on the phone, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. He ended the call immediately. "Good news. Good news," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she held up the papers. "Craig, this is everything." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You're an exceptional pilot, Grace. Larson Aviation would have been foolish not to have you back." She pulled back slightly, looking at the crew roster again. A familiar name was listed under Captain Craig Larson. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're my captain," she breathed. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, the same smile she'd fallen for when he was just a security guard. "I couldn't let my favorite co-pilot fly with anyone else, could I?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "Besides, I figured it was the best way to make sure we get to spend our days together, on the ground, and at 30,000 feet. It wasn't just a job. It was a partnership, woven into every aspect of their lives." He hadn't just given her back her dream. He had made himself a part of it. He saw her, all of her, the mechanic, the mother, to pilot, and loved every part. A laugh escaped her lips, pure and joyous. All the struggle, all the humiliation, all the betrayal she had endured seemed to fade into insignificance, replaced by this overwhelming, incandescent love. She looked at this man, her husband, her partner, the secret billionaire who had won her heart with kindness, not cash, and knew she was finally home. Later that afternoon, they walked across the vast, manicured lawn, a small figure swinging between them. Andy chatted excitedly, pointing at a plane streaking across the brilliant blue sky. "Can we go on a big plane for our honeymoon?" Andy asked, looking up at them with wide, hopeful eyes. Grace squeezed Craig's hand. "It's a honeymoon, sweetie. And yes, we can." Craig scooped Annie into his arms, settling him on his shoulders. "We can go anywhere you want, champ," he said, his eyes meeting Grace's over their son's head. "Where to first? First Officer Jenkins." Grace smiled, her heart so full it felt like it could take flight on its own. "You're the captain," she said, her voice filled with love and infinite promise. "You set the course. I'm with you, all the way." Hand in hand, they walked toward the house, a family forged in secrets but now bound by truth, their future as open and boundless as the sky awaiting them.